Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV 24/7 with me, Aditi Bhardwaj, and we will talk about what's happening around the world and what is Trump-Musk chat holding on about. But before that, let's quickly take a look at the top headlines we are tracking. Billionaire Musk, I beg your pardon, holds a conversation with the US presidential nominee Donald Trump on social media platform X. Trump speaks about assassination bid and also of COVID handling. Trump and Musk interview was earlier plagued by glitches. Musk said X suffering from massive cyber attacks. FBI probes alleged hack attempts on Donald Trump and Biden's campaign. Trump campaign accuses Iran of cyber attack. Ukraine seizes 28 villages in Russia's Kursk, largest cross-border attack on Russia since World War II. Russia claims Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant seriously damaged by Ukraine. 5 Western countries have called on Iran and its allies to refrain from anticipated attacks on Israel in retaliation for the recent killings of senior members of Hamas and Hezbollah. And in a major shockwave, 5.4 magnitude earthquake hits Syria and Lebanon. 4.4 magnitude earthquake also hits Los Angeles and San Diego. And viewers, Israel and Hamas are set to come to the negotiating table in the next 3 days to broker a ceasefire deal. And just ahead of that, now 5 Western countries have called on Iran and its allies to refrain from anticipated attacks on Israel in retaliation for the recent killings of senior members of Hamas and Hezbollah. The leaders of the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany and Italy have issued a joint statement expressing their support for ongoing efforts to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East and secure a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Now, the Western powers have also endorsed the latest push by the US, Qatar and Egypt to broker a truce agreement to end the 10-month-long war. We also have Mohammad Ghazali joining us for shortly, but before that, to take a look at the report and then we will deep dive into it. But my colleague Mohammad Ghazali is now also live with me and we will talk more about it. But before that, let's take a look at the top report.
Amid a mounting death toll in Gaza and an all-out war on the brink, Israel and Hamas are set to come to the negotiating table in the next 3 days to broker a ceasefire deal in the 10-month-long war that has killed thousands and shows no signs of de-escalation. While international mediators like the US, Egypt and Qatar are working towards a peace proposal, an Israeli strike on a school-turned-shelter in Gaza City killed 93 Palestinians, sparking international outrage and highlighting Tel Aviv's continued aggressive tactics in Gaza. From Qatar, Jordan to the UK and US, global leaders expressed outrage and condemned the Israeli strike, one of the deadliest attacks the war has seen yet. The latest strike joins a long list of Israeli attacks on civilian infrastructure, from the infamous IDF strike on the Al Ahli Arab Hospital, among numerous others. Netanyahu said negotiators would attend the talks to finalize the details and implement the framework agreement. The Israeli leader warned that the talks would not halt the offensive in Gaza. Meanwhile, Hamas pushed back on engaging in new negotiations and rather urged mediators to implement the framework agreed upon last month based on US President Joe Biden's proposal. The two parties are to meet for negotiations on August the 15th in either Cairo or Doha to broker a ceasefire and hostage release deal. If the talks do take place later this week, it would mark the first time that Hamas will head into talks with Gaza leader Yahya Sinwar at the helm after Ismail Haniyeh, the group's leader and top negotiator, was killed in Iran earlier this month. Meanwhile, on the ground, protests continue in the West Bank and within Israel, calling for ceasefire. Meanwhile, at Israel's northern front, tensions continue between Israel and Hezbollah, with the IDF saying 30 projectiles were identified crossing from Lebanon into northern Israel. International diplomats are now rushing to put together a truce proposal that could help calm soaring tensions in the region following the assassination of Hamas chief Haniyeh in Tehran and a senior Hezbollah commander in Beirut. The clock is ticking, and now all eyes are on whether the two parties will come to the negotiating table on August the 15th to decide the course of a war that has devastated West Asia. With Disha Bagchi, Bureau Report for NDTV World.
Now, my colleague Mohammad Ghazali is also now joining me for more details. Ghazali, what do the Western nations want to implement that will help in ceasefire in Gaza?
See, the Western nations as well as Israel is actually hunting with the hounds and running with the hare. Because on one side they're talking about de-escalation, but they're also supporting Israel's war in Gaza against Hamas. And every time, the report also mentioned that every time it appeared that perhaps a ceasefire talk or negotiations are on the table, and both the parties with the help of mediators like Qatar, Egypt or even Turkey will agree for a ceasefire talk or will sit for a negotiation, Israel carries out a brutal attack with maximum casualty, and then the talks derail. Now, another big challenge right now is, though the Western countries are concerned about two things. One, Iran is also preparing for an attack or retaliatory attack on Israel, and they are concerned that perhaps if Iran attacks within the next few days, it will derail the ceasefire talks, and that is why they are expecting that before Iran launches its attack, the ceasefire talks should start. That's why 15th of August is the date when most of the Western nations have called Israel as well as the representative of Hamas to hold the negotiations in either Cairo or in Doha, in either Egypt or in Qatar. But right now the situation is that whenever there are talks about ceasefire, just a couple of days ago Israel carried out a big attack with maximum casualty, more than 100 people at least getting killed in Gaza. So these are the talks, that is when the talks derail. And also US particularly keeps saying that we are going to support Israel in its war against terrorism or its war against Hamas, and they're also moving their military assets in the Middle East. So at a time when it appears now that perhaps ceasefire is the demand of every stakeholder in this conflict, US and Israel continue to push for more security, to intensify the attack against Hamas, and that is why it doesn't look very likely whether these ceasefire talks will also lead to any kind of peace in the region, because now Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas political bureau chief or the political chief, was killed earlier this month in Iran, and now Yahya Sinwar, who appears to be much more, you can say, not as moderate as was being projected like Ismail Haniyeh. Yahya Sinwar will also be, he is now the representative of Hamas, and he is also one of the main targets like which Israel has been hunting on since October 7. He is said to be, reported to be the main mastermind behind October 7 attack. So he is now going to represent Hamas for the negotiation talks. So you'll have to see that how, despite the pressure from the Western countries, whether Hamas or even Israel agrees for a ceasefire talk or not. August 15 is the day when everybody is waiting that ceasefire talks will happen. But it all depends that how Israel reacts to it, because the last time when we spoke about, or when the reports emerged that there will be ceasefire talks, Israel carried out an attack in Gaza. Similar attacks are also happening in West Bank. So situation is on the boil. US is moving its military assets in the Middle East, considering that Iran is also waiting to attack on Israel, a retaliatory attack over the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. So situation is certainly on the boil. It's confusing as well. But all the mediators like Egypt, like Turkey and other Middle Eastern nations are also playing the role of mediator. We'll have to see whether all these mediation helps and de-escalate the situation in the Middle East.
Rightly said so. Thank you so much, Mohammad Ghazali, for joining us this morning and detailing what the Western nations want. Now, I have with me a strategic affairs expert, Brahma Chalani, and Mr. Brahma Chalani knows, he's an eclectic person who knows a lot of things about the foreign affairs. Mr. Brahma Chalani, thank you so much for speaking to NDTV. First, detail to us what are the complexities around the ceasefire deal, and how will the Western nations ensure that all the parties who are part of this ceasefire deal will comply to what the Western nations want?
The efforts to reach a ceasefire have been going on for months now. The issue is that the Western powers have failed to persuade Israeli Prime Minister Bibi to accept a ceasefire. In fact, just yesterday, Bibi slammed his own defense minister for questioning his government's goal to achieve, quote-unquote, total victory in Gaza. The fact is that Israel's own military has acknowledged publicly that the goal of military victory in Gaza is not feasible because you cannot destroy Hamas. You can take out its senior figures one by one, assassinating one commander after another. But Hamas as a militant group cannot be totally destroyed. And yet Bibi insists on achieving total victory in Gaza. The problem is that in his pursuit of total victory, Gaza is being increasingly devastated, and this is provoking international concern and even anger because the scale of the humanitarian crisis is shocking the global conscience.
So, Mr. Brahmacharani, if there are some serious impacts, but Iran and Hezbollah continue to maintain that they will not back down, as it is their ultimate right after what Israel did to their leaders and after, as you said, Ismail Haniyeh, who was eliminated, then how do you see this war panning out?
Israel today is in a very difficult situation. It has no military solution in Gaza. It has no military solution against Hezbollah, which is a far more powerful militia than Hamas. Nor does Israel have a military solution against Iran. And yet, Israel has been locked in a shadow war with Iran for decades. Iran and its proxies had been engaged in this shadow war with Israel. And both Iran and Israel today being locked in a dangerous cycle, there is this bigger threat of a wider war in the Middle East. The threat of a direct military confrontation between Israel and Iran looms ever larger as Israel braces up for likely Iranian and Hezbollah reprisal attacks against Israel.
So, Mr. Brahmacharani, this makes one wonder, then what's the role of the Western nations? The United Nations also, we continue to talk about it. The United Nations continue to issue statements over wars. Then what is the, what should be done in order to control such ramifications of a war? First, Israel Hamas, now Iran wants to intervene. Hezbollah is already initiating attacks. Then how does we ensure that world moves towards peace and not war?
That's a good question. You have to keep in mind that the United Nations has increasingly been marginalized in world affairs. This is largely because there have been no structural reforms of the UN to make the UN more in tune with today's geopolitical realities in the world. So the UN is basically a bystander, not just in the Middle East, but also in relation to the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, in fact, is a bigger threat to international peace and security than the conflict in the Middle East. And yet the UN played no role in relation to the Ukraine war. And as far as the Western powers are concerned, had the Western powers been more neutral, they could have had a greater say in relation to this conflict between Israel and Iran, Iran plus its proxies. But the fact is that the Western powers are on Israel's side. So when they seek to push peace proposals, Iran and its proxies look at those proposals with some skepticism. That's the reason why Western intervention is not really helping to push the peace process along.
Right. And hence, Mr. Brahmachalani, this makes one wonder, can a peace deal be achieved or not? But efforts are continuing. And thank you so much for joining us and speaking to us over this, Mr. Brahmachalani, this morning. Thank you so much for joining NDTV. Now let's talk about what's happening in the billionaire Elon Musk and Trump's conversation. Well, the conversation is likely going towards what Trump describes as he overcome the assassination bid. And then he also goes on to talk about how he successfully managed the COVID-19 crisis. Meanwhile, earlier the talks were scheduled to be held at an earlier time, but were challenged by technical difficulties at the outset, with some users having difficulty with accessing the feed. Now, the social media platform X is currently holding the conversation where Trump is speaking about how he managed to overcome the assassination bid that was undertaken against him. He also talks about how his electoral campaign is emerging even stronger against Kamala Harris, who is also leading in opinion polls in 3 states. Now, informing about the same, Elon Musk said that there appears to be a massive DDoS attack, which was a cyber attack, which Elon Musk claimed that happened, and hence the talks which were scheduled to be held earlier were delayed. But now the conversation is being held on the social media platform X, and US presidential candidate Mr. Donald Trump is not leaving this chance, and this is an opportunity to limelight at a time when the campaign of Donald Trump is facing new headwinds. We also have a reaction. Listen in.
We think we've overcome most of that, and so it's now time to proceed. But as this massive attack illustrates, there's a lot of opposition to people just hearing what President Trump has to say.
Now, speaking over the US presidential nominees, candidates, Donald Trump's campaign, FBI is also probing the alleged hack attempts on Trump and Biden camps. Now, Trump campaign has accused Iran of cyber attack. The FBI is probing efforts to see whether Donald Trump and Biden-Harris campaigns were in fact hacked. Now, there have been recent accusations and reports that the campaigns were hacked, after which the FBI has launched a probe. Now, Trump election campaign has accused Iran of an hacking attempt on his campaign, and hence dislodging his efforts to continue the US presidential race. Now, shifting our focus to what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine's top military commander says his forces are now in control of nearly 400 square miles in the Kursk border region. Ukrainian President Zelensky praised his troops for their steadfastness and decisive action in Kursk, where the Ukrainian army has reportedly seized dozens of Russian villages in the surprise cross-border incursion. However, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has vowed to kick the enemy out. Listen in.
Главная задача стоит, безусловно, перед Министерством обороны. Выбить противника с наших территорий и совместно с пограничной службой обеспечить надежное прикрытие госграницы. Федеральная служба безопасности совместно с Росгвардией должна обеспечить режим контртеррористической ситуации и эффективную борьбу с диверсионно-разведывательными группами противника.
Now, the war was also escalated on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which were seen smokes of plumes blowing in. Now, the Ukraine and Russia both claim that both of the countries were involved in the attack. However, there is a statement coming in from Russian President Vladimir Putin. Take a look.
Радирня расположена на дамбе, которая разделяет пруд-охладитель с Каховским водохранилищем. В охладителе мы держим необходимый уровень воды свыше 14 метров, и если бы обрушилась градирня и разрушила или серьезно повредила дамбу, вода бы ушла, а это прямая угроза сегодняшнему, не завтрашнему, а сегодняшнему уровню безопасности станции. Мы расцениваем происшедшее нападение не просто как провокацию, как целенаправленный удар по безопасности инфраструктуры. И градирня, и водоохладительные системы являются ключевыми элементами безопасности атомного энергетического объекта.
Я дуже розраховую також, що міністр оборони та всі наші українські дипломати будуть максимально активно працювати з партнерами щодо далекобійності для України. Нам потрібні відповідні дозволи від партнерів на застосування далекобійної зброї. Це те, що може значно, дуже наблизити справедливе завершення цієї війни, а також врятувати тисячі життів українців.
And with that, we're slipping into a very short break. Now, Foreign Affairs advisor has said that Sheikh Hasina's extended stay in Delhi will not negatively impact the bilateral relations between Bangladesh and India. He said, and I quote, "Bilateral relations is a big thing. It's built on mutual trust and interest." He said when asked by a journalist if Sheikh Hasina's prolonged stay in India might affect the relationship between the two neighboring countries. Now, Bangladesh's interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, will meet Hindu students today over attacks on minorities. Yunus said that it is of grave concern and it needs to be resolved after several reports came out that the minorities in Bangladesh were being attacked. Now, a fast-spreading wildfire tore through several neighborhoods close to the Greek capital of Athens on Monday, prompting authorities to urge residents to evacuate their homes. There has been one death also reported as wildfires rage across Athens suburbs. And Disney bestows the legend status on 14 artists. Miley Cyrus, Harrison Ford honored as Disney legends. Honorees created significant impact on Disney's legacy.
To the Disney Legends Ceremony.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition.